origin of the award. This is the Peter C. Rollins Award, who was one of the founders of what was then the Southwest Texas Popular Culture Association. The award annually recognizes contributions to the study of popular and/or American culture, and in particular, works analyzing cultural and historical representations in film, television, and/or other visual media. This year's winner is Greg Ehrbar, who wrote the 2025 volume, Hanna-Barbera, The Recorded History from Modern Stone Age to Meddling Kids. Greg will be our keynote speaker this evening, and we're going to have him out here in just a moment. He is an author, presenter, and recent guest host on Turner Classic Movies. For over 40 years, he has created content for Disney marketing, corporate communications, music publishing, and imagineering, as well as Warner Brothers, DreamWorks, Universal, and the Television Academy. He is a two-time Grammy Award nominee and multiple Abby Award winner. Greg calls Southern California his home, with wife Suzanne, 2 grown children, and an adorable dog named Romy. We're going to play Greg on with a video that I'm sure you will enjoy and maybe you've got memories for some of you.
Smarter than I'm sure you know of at least 1 or 2 or 3 or 60 of those cartoons. Hanna-Barbera made a lot, thousands and thousands of hours of filmed entertainment, mostly animation, but also live action for television, for movies, for theme parks. It was at one time the largest animation studio in the world. It employed more people, I would think even to date, that any studio ever did. And they were dedicated to keeping people working, keeping the doors open so that people could buy groceries and get their kids through school. I'm going to tell you a quick story that a gentleman named Mark Evanier said. He was working there and he asked Bill Hanna, you know, we spread ourselves kind of thin sometimes. Maybe you should turn down 1 or 2 series. And he said, okay, Mark, look over there in that department. You tell me who to fire. That was their philosophy. And I just want to tell you, as they say on the Great British Baking Show, I'm chuffed. I want to thank the Southwest Popular American Culture Association and the memory of Dr. Peter C. Rollins, and everybody on the committees and the boards and the groups, and everybody who's been so kind to honor this book and this subject. I want to thank my wife, Suzanne, who is, as it says in the book, the heart and soul of this book. My son, Colin, and my daughter, Katie, and of course, Romy, the doggy. And Bill Hanna, Joe Barbera, and those thousands and thousands of people who work for them. Everyone who came here tonight, and the people who are going to be honored as well. But speaking of being honored, I still have to grapple with, I didn't set out to win an award with this book. I set out to write, and I had written books before, and I worked for Disney for 30 years in advertising and marketing as a copywriter, but I also wrote for the music company, as you heard, and for other areas. But I started writing books for children and read-alongs. The first book I wrote, The Mousetraps, was about the Disney record division. It was one division of the company, and it was a very, very specific area of Disney. When I set out to do the Hanna-Barbera book, I thought I was going to do the same thing at first, because they had their own record company from 1965 to 1967, and it was a wonderfully weird, strange record company. But I thought, I talked to the editors, especially talked to my wife. As the story grew, it became more than a story about records, and even more than a story about audio. That's why recorded history means 2 things. The power of Hanna-Barbera, by and large, and especially with television animation, is the soundtrack. You need the best voice actors you can get to do multiple voices. You need great music, some of which the cues have to play over and over and still sound fresh, and have to be used in different ways, but they fit, which is an art in itself. And you have to have sound effects that are so iconic that when you hear them later, you go, that's Fred Flintstone's tiptoe when he's bowling, or that's George Jetson's car, which I found out for the first time in the book how that was done. That was a pretty cool thing. So I didn't expect an award. I was lucky I could finish the book without thinking about how I was going to organize it, because it ended up having to be a chronological history from the early days of both Bill and Joe before they met in 1937, created Tom and Jerry in 39, released the first cartoon in 40, and then thought they were going to work at MGM forever, and then suddenly, boom, the entire department's laid off. They have to tell all of the people, you have no more work. They start a new company in this new area of television, reinventing a way of doing animation at a much lower cost and still having it be entertaining. What they also did with shows like the Flintstones and the Jetsons is, because those shows were on so much, there was a bond created with those characters that really hadn't happened in theatrical animation. I mean, yeah, goodness knows, Bambi, Snow White, Cinderella, but when back in the day you had to wait 7 years to see those, and it was a really big deal. And even when you have them on video, you don't necessarily watch them all the time. Some kids love to do that. But Huckleberry Hound and Top Cat and those shows, Hong Kong Phooey, they were on either once a week or in syndication every single day. And these were cartoon characters that became very real to people. You know, when Hell's Birth happened in 1963, which was just celebrated recently all over the internet, surprisingly, even Entertainment Weekly or one of those things took it up. People magazine. The cast, when they recorded it, broke into tears at the end because they were a close cast, and that came through on the cartoon. You know, the Flintstones are a cartoon, but you got closer to them than you might have to Popeye or Woody Woodpecker, because in movie theaters, they only came occasionally. You'd see them on TV in a regular way, but this was different. So it was a lot of things: character-based storytelling, a generational appeal, and also because the company went through a lot of ownerships, a lot of budget cuts, but they wanted to keep everybody working. They had to keep finding new ways, not only to cut budgets and still make good cartoons, but also to move with the times, to turn on a dime, to go into all of these different phases and trends, and the opening up of different demographics. You know, you can see that change as the cartoons went by and their live action. But there was always a feeling of celebration. It was always, fun was always the number one thing, even in the dramas. It was a lot of fun and celebration, even if it was in a film like Charlotte's Web, a celebration of life and existence and friendship, about what we all share together. And I think I want to sort of segue that into another little short video that shows you the theatrical things that Hanna-Barbera did, in addition to Tom and Jerry cartoons. And you'll see a bit of how their shows were made into movies, but also their original productions. So let's just roll that one, number 2.
Look at me, I'm dancing!
We are the indisputable, positively irrefutable. You might say we're me and Unable teammates, teammates.
We've all got lots in common, where it really counts, where it really counts. We've got knowledge and class.
What they look like doesn't count enough.
We've got lots in common, where it really counts.
Can't you understand? She's the people. She's the enemy, and we're rats, rats, rats. You got that? Now come here, I'll tell you how to be a rat.
They're back.
All right!
The Jetsons in their first feature-length motion picture.
Congratulations!
High-flying adventure that will send your spirits soaring. Once Upon a Forest. Stevens New Rock presents The Flintstones.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you. Scooby-Doo. Sing a happy song.
Stop! None of you find that song just the tiniest bit annoying.
I find it annoying. The Smurfs.
Tom and Jerry begins the book and ends the book because It sort of worked out that way. Bill and Joe were partners, but they were extreme opposites. As a matter of fact, Bill Hanna was born in Melrose, New Mexico, a little sleepy little village town. And he was a small town guy with a close family. Joe Barbera was born in Brooklyn. He was a tough street kid. His family was very unconventional, and they just were nothing alike. But what Joe had was a sense of story. He knew how to he drew incredible storyboards. When you watch a Tom and Jerry cartoon and people wonder, why were theirs so much better than any that came later? It's because he knew how to get those expressions. He knew how to get his artist, because they had great artists on these films, to do those expressions. And then Bill Hanna was a musician. He wrote many of those theme songs with Joe and with Hoyt Curtin, another giant. And he knew how to time things. They did it on these exposure sheets to the absolute maximum of making them funny. And so that's part. Then they had Scott Bradley doing the music, who knew when to just stop the music and let the sound effects hit in. So all of those elements went together, and Tom and Jerry became the most popular character series in the history of motion pictures. They won 7 Academy Awards, more than Meryl Streep. That's right. And they were tied with Walt Disney for nominations. The Silly Symphonies, I think it was 11, and Tom and Jerry was 11. So they were huge cartoon stars. That's why they were appearing in these movies with Gene Kelly and Esther Williams. And when Tom and Jerry was brought back several times, the last time was 2021, and this was just coming out of COVID. And people were not going to theaters, and then eventually it became a little safer to go. And what the companies were doing were either charging you extra to see a movie on their streaming service, or what Warner did was say, look, if you want to go to a theater and pay, nice, but we're not going to force you to go. You can see the movie at your regular streaming price. And people still pay to see Tom and Jerry. So there you go. It was very successful. So I just, all I can tell you is that putting this book together was a life-changing thing, and I did not expect that. Just like I don't expect all of you people to be here. This is probably a dream. I just can't believe it. Thank you. A lot of doubt goes into writing a book. You have these people on one arm going, do it. My wife especially, you can do it. Write from your heart, write the story you need to tell. And then you've got all those teachers and all those people going, hey, participles and all that stuff. And you're gonna get stuff wrong, and on social media, well, I found this thing wrong. As it turned out, people I even thought wouldn't like the book did. And any kind of constructive criticism they sent to me was always framed with, but there's so much more in there. I was stunned, because you're scared when you spend 5 years or so and a lifetime of loving this stuff. And you also wonder, will people love it as much as you? And I'm finding out that they do. And that means the most to me. We started a podcast a year before the book came out, The Fantastic World of Hanna and Barbera. And there's so much that couldn't fit in the book. We had the little kid who was a Jack and the Beanstalk, grown up, and we find out their careers. We talk to sons and daughters of these great people. We talk to executives who work with Bill and Joe, the Kings Island. It goes on and on and on. It stuns me to the point where now I have guests who don't fit Hanna-Barbera, so I had to start another podcast called Pop Culture Favorites. I never expected that to become a new direction in life. So this can happen. It doesn't always happen, but all I can tell you is that believe in what you're doing, write about what you're passionate about. Don't expect it to be easy. It did kind of take on a life of its own as I was writing it. Sit down and do it. Hopefully you have people in your lives, or surround yourself with people who tell you you can, and kind of shift a little away from the ones and say, gotta go, from the people who don't. It's pretty simple, but I just gotta tell you again, on behalf of, as if I can say, behalf of the Hanna and Barbera and all those wonderful people and this great legacy that I think will live forever, I really do believe that now, because there's a lot of young people in here, and it's like you're gonna look at Anchors Away and say, what is that movie? I gotta find out more about it. Who cares when it was made? 1945, so what? Who was Gene Kelly? Who was the director? And then you find out, that's the fun of all of this, is going deeper and finding out who the musicians were and all that. That's what I did all my life, and I know that's what's happening in this room. So it just does my heart good, and I just say thank you once again.
So we have a couple of things. The first is, we are going to do Q&A, a brief Q&A, but before we do that, we would like to present Greg with a little souvenir to take home with you and remember this time here in Albuquerque. Tammy is going to be looking for anyone who would like to ask questions. Greg will also be available to sign books and have individual conversations as well at the conclusion of the reception.
Oh, sure. I feel like we can start off with an easy underhand toss. What's your favorite cartoon from Hanna-Barbera?
Well, they're probably, I'd have to put it in 3 categories. Series-wise, the Flintstones. If I was on a desert island, I could watch it over and over again. I mean, it's just, it doesn't ever wear out. Movies, Charlotte's Web, hands down. And specials, there's an Alice in Wonderland where she falls through a TV set and meets Fred and Barney as a caterpillar. It has not been released yet. We're hoping, but that's my favorite special. I do really love that. But I really don't dislike anything they did. I mean, some stuff is, some of the live action, some of the variety shows are cheesy, maybe to say the least, but I don't think they ever really made junk. I think they always tried really hard to do good stuff.
Hello, big guy over here.
Hi.
I was curious if your book goes into sort of the resurgence of Hanna-Barbera with William Street, the reintroduction of Space Ghost as a talk show, and then sort of getting into the Boomerang as an entire channel, sort of bringing back Hanna-Barbera as an entire production line.
Well, a friend of mine, Jerry Beck, who is a far more erudite and expert in animation than I am, he says whenever there's a remake or a reboot or whatever, if it's good, great. Even if it's not, the good stuff will always last. And that's what I feel about this. So when they do a reinterpretation of something new, like Jellystone, to me it's like, oh my gosh, Winsome Witch is in this, and the Hillbilly Bears, and these characters that, Wally Gator, it's not just the main ones. That's very exciting to me, because even if it's not my interpretation of it, it means that a whole generation seeing it again. Space Ghost Coast to Coast is in there because that was the show that launched Adult Swim. And it was a brilliant, inexpensive idea of taking existing animation and turning him into a talk show host. It was weird, it was nuts, and they had got all these stars on it because they wanted to be part of this strange thing. It was like Batman. And it really took off. So that's the whole point, is you can look at Space Ghost or Super Friends or Shazam, and you can look at those things seriously, or you can look at them as high camp and ridiculous, because let's face it, superhero stuff is both. And Hanna-Barbera generally treated superheroes just like they treated Tom and Jerry and other characters. Villain, what they're trying to do, gag, 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 gag. This will stop them, and it went on and on and on, and then they solved it. So yes, it's definitely in there, the evolution of what a cartoon all of that. In fact, I had the president, Fred Seibert, who created What a Cartoon, and I haven't finished editing it yet, but that'll be on the podcast soon.
I do want to let folks know Kathleen has another mic for that side of the room, so we're not ignoring you. Flag her down if you have a question over there. We have one here to keep us moving.
Hi. So my parents, well, I grew up with Hanna-Barbera. Hi. Okay. My parents grew up in Puerto Rico, and they watched Hanna-Barbera dubbed in Spanish, so they grew up with Pedro Piedras and Fred Flintstone. And I was just wondering if you explored like the international impact of Hanna-Barbera cartoons in your book.
I did, not nearly enough because it's a vast thing and it's hard to always find especially the albums in America. Thank goodness eBay has them. I do have I can say a piece of theater album, a 2-album Flintstone set of pop music. It's great. And I've got Don Gato, Top Cat's very popular in Mexico. There's been 2 films. And 2 Tom and Jerry story albums from the 1975 series in German. So yeah, again, in Japan, Muttley and Dastardly and Muttley are very popular. So there are CDs of that music. In fact, the Hanna-Barbera song you heard was from a Japanese CD called We Love Hanna-Barbera. That's what's so great about getting into this sort of thing is you never stop discovering. And the hardest thing about writing a book like this is stepping away and saying, I can't have this, I want to, but I can't, I have to send it in. That kind of thing. So yes, indeed, I did.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could speak to the multi-generational appeal of their work. When my son was, I thought, the right age, I introduced him to Johnny Quest. And very quickly, he became obsessed with it and started asking for it. And of course, it only ran 1 season, right? So, and then Scooby-Doo. So I'm just wondering if you could comment on the multi-generational appeal of their work.
I think if something's cool and neat, it's cool to every generation. These keep getting discovered. People will say, I didn't know this exists. You see that a lot. When I see somebody say something on Facebook like, I didn't know this existed, I usually say, like Kermit the Frog and the Great Muppet Caper, I wish I were you seeing this for the first time. Because you're just on the brink of just discovering this. And yeah, the original Johnny Quest was an extremely expensive cartoon. And ABC canceled it because they couldn't get the return on investment they could have gotten with live action. That's what happened with Top Cat and Genesis. Flintstones was a juggernaut, so they could. But that's the real reason. There was a nice revival in the 80s that isn't shown on MeTV Tunes yet, but was on DVD. Not as good, but very good. And then there is a Real Adventures that was done in the 90s that had early computer animation. But you can't touch those original shows. They're works of art. And the Robot Monster, the Robot Spy, I mean, some of those, Terror the Terrible, those are like great sci-fi movies. And I'm thrilled to hear that, really. Thank you.
Hi. So, first off, I want to say, as a younger scholar, seeing you so happy to receive that award almost made me cry, because I was like, oh, there's still joy in academia? So, I really appreciate that. You're off, man. Totally. Keep being metal, man. My question, I know you wouldn't expect somebody who looks like a gay Peaky Blinder to say that, but it's whatever, man. My question to you is, if with Hanna-Barbera having such a profound legacy, if you know of any either animation studios or more contemporary, say within the past 15, 20 years, of shows that are continuing the same spirit or you foresee as having maybe a similar cultural impact?
I think Bob's Burgers is like that. Bob's Burgers is kind of, it's naughty, but like all the other primetime ones are, it gets a little edgy, but I know Lauren Bouchard, and he wrote a blurb for the book, because to me, Bob's Burgers is the Flintstones of today. And what I love about Bob's Burgers is there is a dysfunctional warmth between that family that is exactly like, Fred could be a complete moronic jerk And really, but then later, he knows what he is, and he, you know, there's such a dimension to those people. It's the same thing on Bob's Burgers. The things that happen are outrageous, but they come to these realizations, and it's like, I don't know. I mean, I like The Simpsons, Family Guy's okay, and all that stuff, but I don't know of a show where they come to like, maybe this is not a good idea, or, you know, and it isn't done in a sort of He-Man, you know, we learned today that we should be nice to him. It's done in a very organic way. And to me, that's a powerful way of storytelling. You can get across all kinds of ideas about people and relationships and stuff if you do it in an organic way. That takes good writing, you know. And so, yeah, I think those shows exist. I think there's a lot of hope. One of my son's favorite is The Regular Show. What a great show. And one of the reasons it's great is like what Hanna-Barbera did, it's all about construction, and they start with where the story's going to end in insanity, and it starts real quiet with them setting up chairs. And, you know, it's like you don't even know where it's going. There's a lot of fantastic stuff. Yeah, that's why I feel very hopeful for it. But it's important to know when you do this kind of work is where did it come from, who was doing it, and what did they go through that I can learn from? Because they created the construction.
All right, we've got time for one more question, and so if you have any other questions after this one, Greg will be around signing books a little bit later, and you can come up and talk to him too then.
Thank you. You mentioned that Tom and Jerry is considered so much greater than some of the others. I find them all eminently watchable. I even like Ricochet Rabbit and Minute Mouse. But
I do too.
The ones from the late 60s and early 70s that were so much a part of my youth don't have the reputation of being the most dynamic animation in the world. I wonder if you could speak to that.
I totally agree with you, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's part of my aim in life is to bring some respect and dignity to that era. Because what you hear from a lot of people who don't know the chronology is, you know, well, after Johnny Quest, or after, you know, my wife loves Mush Mouse and Pumpkin Puss. But, you know, so there you go. I love Precious Pup. You know, and you'll also find generations who think Laugh Olympics was the best show, and I was sick. Or Captain Caveman, or Droopy Detective, you know, or Yo-Yogi. So it depends on the generation that it hit. But you also have to take into consideration, this was a Hanna-Barbera of 1964, this was a Hanna-Barbera of 1985, and Disney's, which is very parallel in the book, Disney's evolution was like that too. Eventually, they could not make the kind of cartoons they made before the war, but they found ways to make beautiful films with those limitations. So I want people to know how good those are, and I'm glad. I'm glad you brought them up because I'm telling you, you know, Willie and the Chopper Bunch is a fine show, and so is Hanna-Barbera Bunch. Don't get me started. I love it.
Rob Weiner, Hugh Foley, and Melissa Tackett Gibson for their work and continued dedication to popular culture scholarship. They have recently completed their most recent round of judging, and Greg is going to announce the winner of the 2026 Peter Rollins Award.
And the winner is L.A. Coroner, Thomas Noguchi, and Death in Hollywood by Ann Soon Choi.
And we're going to get to the awards portion.